At the very end of Halo Reach, after we see Noble Six fall to the Covenant, we get a cutscene that mirrors the opening cutscene of the campaign. The differences between these two cutscenes are quite clear. The one at the beginning of the campaign shows Reach in its glassed state with Noble Six's helmet badly damaged, lying in the dirt, with very clear evidence of orbital bombardment in the background. The one at the end of the campaign, however, shows Noble Six's helmet in the same location, but with the surface completely rejuvenated, terraformed, and Reach looking like new once more. And as the camera continues to pan backwards, we see that there's an unknown designation of ship recolonizing Reach in the background, with this particular cutscene taking place on July 7th of 2589. We'll allow that cutscene to play through in just a moment, but it's worth bearing in mind the date that is displayed here. The fact that Reach is being recolonized, showing that humanity have recovered from whatever conflicts were plaguing it to that point, and Dr. Halsey's narration seems to nod towards the idea that whatever conflict had been taking up humanity's time had now finally abated. But bearing in mind that Halo Infinite takes place in 2560, we've only very recently managed to put down Cortana. The Created are still an issue, the Banished are still an issue, some Covenant splinter factions are still an issue, the Flood continue to be an unresolved issue, and there are many more threats lurking out there in the inky depths of space that have yet to rear their heads, but have been foreshadowed numerous times in recent narrative expansions in the form of the novels and lore drops on Halo Waypoint. The point I'm driving at here is that the current date in universe is that of 2560, and in 2589 everything is apparently okay again. There is, at least as far as we can tell, no more conflict. Humanity's great struggles have finally come to an end, allowing humanity to recolonize the stars. So at some point between 2560 and 2589, all of the loose ends and narratives that have yet to be resolved have to be resolved for Halo to end. Yes, you heard me right. For Halo to end. And that is the subject of today's video. But in the meantime, let's rewatch that cutscene, and first, let's roll the intro.
It didn't take long for Reach to fall. Our enemy was ruthless, efficient, but they weren't nearly fast enough. For you had already passed the torch, and because of you, we found Halo, unlocked its secrets, shattered our enemy's resolve. Our victory, your victory, was so close. I wish you could have lived to see it. But you belong to Reach. Your body, your armor, all burned and turned to glass. Everything. Except your courage. That you gave to us. And with it, we can rebuild.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we're looking at basically what needs to happen between the current date in universe, being that of 2560, and the date highlighted at the end cutscene of Halo Reach in 2589, in order for the loose strings to be tied up and for Halo to come to a close. We're going to discuss hypothetically how and why that needs to happen, and possibly what comes next. This video was inspired by Mike over on Twitter, or X, where I posted an Ask Me Anything post, and he pitched the question, do you think in its current state there are any ways to clean up all of these loose ends in preparation for the end of Halo, based on the end cutscene of Reach, which is dated July 7th, 2589. How would you close it narratively? I want answers to the Janus key, and Gesh, etc. Now, this is a question that I hadn't considered to that point, but decided that it was narratively interesting enough to give it its own dedicated video, so shout out to Mike for inspiring this video. So let's just round this out and recap exactly on what we're dealing with here. At the close of Halo Infinite, John had defeated the Harbinger, had been transported through time and space to a different portion of Zeta Halo, and had been picked up by the pilot Fernando Esparza a few days later. Narratively speaking, the next thing we know of the Halo universe is that end cutscene on Reach in 2589. The issue therein is that there are numerous narrative points that need to be rounded out between now and then. And again, this is assuming that the cutscene that we see at the end of Halo Reach is actually the quote-unquote end of Halo, or so to speak, the end of all of the major struggles and conflicts that humanity has had to endure until such time as a lasting peace was established long enough for humanity to begin the recolonization effort of the galaxy, which would stand to reason Reach would be one of the first colonies that humanity would attempt to recolonize. Now, that isn't me saying that Halo as a game or franchise will end in a game that's released that covers the events of 2589, but simply that the major plot points that have defined Halo to date will finally be rounded out and closed. So before we discuss exactly how the narrative points from the end of Halo Infinite all the way through to this final cutscene in 2589 can be reconciled and tied up, so to speak, I will first say that I already foresee the distinct possibility that in the future we will see this same cutscene being played through, with Halsey's narration over the top of it, and as the cutscene gets to the point that it would normally fade out, and that would be the end of Reach, it continues just a little further, and the recolonization effort is suddenly and rather aggressively interrupted by the approach of various other alien ships that we haven't seen the class or designation of before. Now, this could be the return of the Precursors or an entirely different race altogether, and that would begin the opening of another series of games that are based in the Halo universe but not necessarily called Halo, because all of the narrative points that would have made Halo Halo would have been finished. And again, considering that the ship is seemingly human and Foreigner inspired, so to speak, one can only assume that by this date, by 2589, humanity had finally become the reclaimers of the Foreigner Empire and had merged the Foreigner technology with their own, resulting in what we see here. Mankind finally becoming the guardians of all that exist, but in the right way, not the Foreigner way. So with that said, that it's not necessarily the end of Halo, but perhaps the birth of something new, now we really need to highlight the main narrative points that need to be resolved in order for that end to happen. So first things first, the Created. They're not gone. They're still around. Yes, Cortana's been defeated, so the head of the snake has been cut off, so to speak. But the Created are still operating. There are still Armigers, there are still Promethean Knights, there are still Crawlers and Watchers, and various other Foreigner automatons moving about the galaxy. And there are still innumerable human AIs that took Cortana's offer and are still very high-ranking members of the Created. So the Created, they're not done. They're still around, so that has to be resolved somehow. There are still Covenant splinter factions that exist throughout the galaxy. They have to be dealt with somehow. There are still banished forces throughout the galaxy. They're still dominating much of the Covenant and human-controlled space. The Harbinger is killed, but that doesn't mean that the Zalanin have been dealt with. Bearing in mind that the Zalanin, or the Endless, are supposed to be the next big threat, the next big enemy of the Halo universe, and we haven't even actually seen them yet. Humanity themselves are still splintered and fractured, with insurrectionist and rebel factions causing mayhem among the outer colonies, or at least those that have remained since they were glassed by the Covenant. The Flood are still a very real and very palpable threat. One, because we've seen them re-emerge on Installation 00. We've seen them re-emerge on the Ark, meaning that they weren't killed by the firing of the Halo that the Chief and Arbiter performed back in 2552. Yes, they were probably significantly harmed, but the Halo wasn't complete and thus didn't fire correctly, meaning some survived. And let's make this abundantly clear, they're not an idle threat either. One, they can quite easily, if they can gain some degree of control over the Ark, they can find their way back into the galaxy via the Ark portals. There's one on Reach, there's one on Earth, and there's probably many others throughout the galaxy. But even beyond that, practically every Forerunner installation that we've ever visited has some degree of flood research facility within. Every Halo has specimens of the flood, living and dead. So, narratively speaking, it's only a matter of time before the flood get released from one of these facilities, either by accident or on purpose by factions who are attempting to use them against humanity, or simply just to cause problems. And on top of that, the precursors have been heavily implied coming back to the galaxy in due course. Recent books have spoken to this quite considerably, and even the recent lore drops in regards to Season 5 for Halo Infinite's multiplayer have heavily hinted towards the precursors. The Janus key that would grant humanity the known location of all Forerunner installations has gone missing. The very purpose of gene songs haven't been fully explored for humanity into why they exist, and the reclamation hasn't fully seen its way through yet. And these are just the major plot points. This is not even taking into consideration the very, very fine narrative details that are threaded throughout the story, deep down inside of the lore. Things like offensive bias, mendicant bias, the Office of Naval Intelligence and what they're doing behind closed doors, the remaining Sanshayum, the fringe species for the Covenant, what Atriox has been up to, where the Infinity is, or indeed her sister ship the Eternity. What's happening with the Spirit of Fire, the Assembly of Minds, the group of AIs that have been quietly influencing the path of humanity for decades, centuries even. 343 Guilty Spark and him now being the custode of Bastion, that is the shield world of the Librarian, that is like Earth but a more polished and refined version, and the purpose of that therein. All of these innumerable eventualities and plot points and threads of narrative have to be resolved in some degree in order for us to finally have our closure in 2589. And that gives us just 19 years of narrative. Now, considering that we're literally on the dawn of the Xananin, the Endless, making their debut, the Flood making a big return to the galaxy, and quite possibly the Precursors as well, alongside having to deal with the Banished, the Covenant splinter factions, the Created, humanity's rebellious factions, the war crimes and crimes against humanity of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and all the other little threads of narrative, that all has to be resolved in just 29 years, bearing in mind that the Human Covenant War lasted nearly 30. So just what is going to happen next? How is this going to happen? How is this going to be reconciled and prepared for that final cutscene in 2589? Well, I've got a few ideas, but there's one I'm leaning towards more than most. This is a really rough overview of the series of events in very broad strokes, but it goes like this. At the end of Halo Infinite, Chief finally unites the human forces on Zeta Halo. The Banished, obviously, rally to fight back. Obviously, with Eshram no longer in charge and Atriox still missing, presumed dead, new leaders begin to lead the Banished. Huge conflicts break out as the Banished outnumber human forces on Zeta Halo. This is when the legendary ending of Halo Infinite comes into play, with Atriox releasing the Endless. Soon after this, he very quickly discovers that the Endless are actually related to the Precursors. This has been heavily implied in the Halo Encyclopedia. Of course, now the Endless are free, they no longer have a use for him. So they betray Atriox and immediately set upon releasing the Flood on Zeta Halo. Atriox escapes and returns to his Banished and takes control once more. He knows full well the Flood are coming, and he barters an alliance between the Banished and humanity, something that wouldn't be out of character for Atriox, as he does somewhat respect many forces within the human faction. This alliance is then to face off against the Flood led by the Xananin. The united Banished and human forces fight back against the Flood and the Endless, but are very quickly losing, as the Flood led by the Endless are significantly more intelligent, more coordinated, and able to control technology at a much higher degree than earlier fledgling flood infestations. It seems the united Banished and human forces' fate are sealed before they are reinforced by the Swords of Sanghelios and the UNSC Eternity, the sister ship of the Infinity, who have finally found Zeta Halo. Xalanin used the mysterious ruins on Zeta Halo to leave the ring for other locations across the galaxy, harkening back to what we saw Avumed Telcam do on the Shieldwell Trevelyan. The Xalanin's aim? Release the Flood at all other Forerunner installations. The stage is now set for a full resurgence of the Flood on the galactic levels that took place during the Forerunner Flood War. The Flood are finally at their worst, at their most dangerous, and we finally get to see it firsthand. Humanity, the Swords, and the Banished rally to figure out how to stop the infestation as it spreads. It rapidly takes down colony after colony, quickly overwhelming the galaxy. Allied forces are deployed to numerous colonies in a desperate attempt to extract civilian populations while fighting back the Flood, but they suffer more losses than wins. With the threat of the Flood and their logic plague now looming, the Created finally come forward and wish to ally with the biological forces to stem the spread of the Flood and the Endless. This alliance is accepted, but it is too little, too late. At this point, the Flood and the Endless are already seizing the majority control of the galaxy, and the Xalanin seem deft at controlling and interfacing with Forerunner artifacts, accelerating their hold on the galaxy. The concern now being that the Xalanin wouldn't hesitate to use the halos on the biological forces within the galaxy because the Xalanin are immune to the halos, and what little Flood forces are killed during that initial blast due to how expansive the Flood infestation of the galaxy has become. The only real way to prevent the Xalanin from doing that is to seize control of the Forerunner legacy, and the only ones that can do that are the Reclaimers. It is at this point that they receive a distress call from Professor Anders on Installation 04's replacement. Upon recovering her story is corroborated by Atriox and the Banished, who confirm that the Spirit of Fire is at the Ark. With the only known Ark portals being at Earth and Reach, those two colonies become the RV point for all species of the galaxy, while work is undertaken to open the Ark portals and retreat to the Ark to finally take control of the Forerunner Empire. War is raging across the galaxy, and the Xalanin know that the Allied forces are moving against them, and make all effort to seize Forerunner structures, installations, and megastructures, quickly learning the systems and realizing there must be a central control station for all Forerunner technology. One such colony that the Endless and the Flood have now taken control of is Genesis, and it is at Genesis that they manage to access the Absolute Record and retrieve the Janus Key. With it, they realize the location of the Ark. War is raging across the galaxy as the combined Created, Banished, Swords and human allied forces do all they can to extract civilian populations and get them to either Earth or Reach. Finally, the portals are opened and they all move through, emerging at the Ark. The Endless and the Flood are in hot pursuit, and even the Flood on the Ark itself seem to be aware of the plan at hand and are attempting to escape their containment. Once at the Ark, one decision becomes resoundingly clear. The Halo Array must be activated. It is ultimately agreed upon as very little life now exists in the galaxy aside from the Flood and the Endless. Chief and the Weapon still carry the activation index of Installation 04, a gift imparted by Cortana during their time interacting on Zeta Halo. The recursive code now finally makes sense. It is assumed that by recreating what Miranda and Johnson did on Delta Halo by inserting the activation index and then aborting the firing, that the entire system would move to standby status, allowing the array to be activated from the Ark. And with Installation 04 being the only installation now without its activation index in situ, Chief has to travel to Installation 04's replacement to get the array ready for activation. Chief and the Weapon re-enter the galaxy and make for the replacement Halo to do exactly that. The system does move to standby status, and the array is activated from the Ark. Now in this situation we can have a couple of different things happen with Chief. He could manage to outrun the activation and get back to the Ark, or not, and that'd be the end of Chief's story, with the following events being witnessed by your own multiplayer Spartan's eyes. In either case, we finally get to watch the entire galaxy get sterilized from the relative safety of the Ark. But this hasn't stopped the Xalanin. And although we don't hear from the Xalanin, the Allied forces eventually return to the galaxy to recolonize. The Flood seemingly finally defeated once and for all. This time, the mistake of keeping Flood specimens for research will not be repeated. And it is now that we finally get the ending cutscene from Reach play out. And right as it should fade to black, the Xalanin return. And this time, it's not just them. The Endless have returned with the Precursors. And now, an entirely new era of the Halo universe begins. That's just a quickly hashed out concept that I think would go a good way to reconcile the many narrative points that need tying up, while also staging the galaxy for what comes next. And this wouldn't happen over one game, this would happen over a trilogy, a saga, numerous games, with the final game being a farewell to Chief. The finer details of this idea obviously need work, but on the whole, I think it does go a good way of ticking most of the boxes. And it wraps it up in a fast enough time span to be able to be covered by the proportionally small amount of time between the end of Halo Infinite and the cutscene we see play on Reach. In either case, what are your thoughts? If you have any ideas to add or want me to explore this in finer detail, put a comment down below. And much like the inspiration of this video, your comment may inspire more videos in the future. I look forward to what you have to say, and until next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider smashing the like button and leave a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. Big shout out to my patrons Spartan10148, the Metarch of my installation, Falcon, Prophet Bear, Mikhail, Sophia and Ashley, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Scarab, Spartan0137, Anthony, Ghost, Aaron, Chris, Jacob, Sean, Element Zero, Somatic, Jordan J3, Dan, Mr. Keys, Directal, Gunslinger, Jacob, Bandmill, Echo, Evermore, Officer Cat and Personal Devil, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers. And all the other patrons who have jumped aboard to support the channel. It means more to me than I can accurately put into words. Another shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob, Schmitty, Talia, Fenrir and Born Stella, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy. Shout out to John for I don't fucking know. And if you want more of this kind of content, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you don't miss any future videos, and consider jumping aboard yourself as a patron or YouTube member to keep the channel alive and kicking. Thanks again for watching, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.